Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to It's Rainmaking Time. This is Kim Greenhouse. The science is not settled. We have a wonderful guest today, Lawrence Solomon, a world-renowned environmentalist, author, and activist who's been at the forefront of movements to stop nuclear power expansion and to save the world's rainforests. He's a columnist with National Post and the author of many books. But the most recent, one of the best sellers on Amazon, is called The Deniers, the world-renowned scientists who stood up against global warming, hysteria, political persecution, and fraud, and those who were too fearful to do so. He is also the executive director of Energy Probe. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lawrence Solomon to It's Rainmaking Time. Good day, sir.
Good day.
Fighting for the environment is not new to you, and it would at first appear to environmental activists that you're against saving the planet. But yet, when I read your book, I connected to being called a denier, because in my first show of It's Rainmaking Time covering climate and weather, I was called a denier for daring to ask the difficult questions and to look at different aspects of the scenario. Talk to us about why the science is not settled, having talked to all these world-renowned experts.
Well, it's not settled because there's simply no unanimity. If you canvass the views of top experts around the world, you realize that there's a dispute about whether the Arctic ice is melting in any unusual way, or if it's really business as usual. There's dispute about Antarctic melting. There's dispute about the oceans rising. There's dispute about glaciers melting. There's dispute about whether the planet is even warming. There's this dispute about the validity of the models. There's dispute, in fact, in virtually every area that the global warming doomsayers claim is beyond dispute.
Apparently in your book you talk about very specific rules you followed when putting the book together. Trying not to settle the science yourself, which I think was very smart, and not to play the numbers game. Talk about what that means, that you didn't want to play the numbers game when you went to do your research.
Well, science isn't really about whether there's a consensus at all. Science really should be about the validity. In fact, great scientists have tended to be on the outsides of conventional thinking. They're the ones who said that the sun does not revolve around the Earth. It's the Earth that revolves around the sun. So those who break from scientific dogma have been the path breakers, and in time they've been recognized as such. So the tradition in science is not to take a vote to see who's right. The tradition in science is to pursue scientific truth, and so for that reason, the very notion of there being a consensus doesn't sit well with scientists, and I don't think it sits well with most members of the public who think about it. At the same time, the typical layman can't assess the science for himself, has to rely on the authority, on the credibility of people that he's presented with. So there is this conflict about what to do. Ultimately, we have to go with people we trust, and especially when public policy is at stake, it's necessary to have a vigorous public debate.
In the context of consensus, for just a moment, how do we arrive at a consistent frame of reference for what we're studying or talking about if consensus shouldn't be built into science? I mean, I totally get what you're saying, but then how do we even agree on anything? And should we?
Well, in most areas, I don't think we need to agree. In most areas of science, for example, some scientists can pursue paths that they think will be profitable. Others other paths that where they think that they'll be able to get valid results, and there'll be a competition among different competing theories in science, and over time, that'll be sorted out, and we'll have an idea of where the truth lies.
Do you think it could be said that the more we need to have a consensus in science, that it's almost like a barometer? The more we have to have a consensus, and that's forced, the less likely true discovery can happen and be made manifest and available.
I think that's an important insight. In most spheres of life, we don't expect everyone to agree to be on the same bandwagon. In science, we haven't expected that in the past. But when we do expect it, when we do try to enforce a dogma on science, we do end up with untoward results, and those results it can be seen in the regular economy as well as the market of ideas.
On page 19 of your book, there was this question: what happened to the peer review process? And I was so excited when I saw this, because we're doing a show on peer review in 2 weeks. It said peer review does not fully vet the papers before they're published. Let me repeat that. Peer review does not fully vet the papers before they're published. And therefore, because peer review is seminal to, integral to, central to discovery or alternate views and hypotheses coming out into the world, then we have to look at peer review. And I just wondered if there's something that you can say about that. I thought that was an extremely important part of your book.
Well, the normal peer review process was suspended in the case of the global warming theories, and it was suspended by the IPCC. Normally, when in science, the peer reviewers are unknown to the authors of the study. That way, the peer reviewers are free to make independent comments. Under the process that the UN set up, the authors know who the peer reviewers are. So many peer reviewers would be reluctant to make a criticism of their colleagues. That's one way in which legitimate dissent was squelched. Another aspect to peer review is that when an author receives criticisms, he's expected to respond to them and to give answers for why he's accepting or rejecting them. In the process that the UN set up, that wasn't the case. The authors could really act on their own to decide what they would accept or reject. They didn't have to answer criticism. So in effect, the United Nations process turned the peer review process on its head. The extent to which it did that was actually greater than I realized when I initially wrote my book. Only recently, with the ClimateGate emails that came out, did it become clear that often there was not only no peer review, but not even any real science behind a lot of the claims. Often the claims were based on inadvertent comments that people might have made, or on material that might have come from a popular magazine, as was the case where the IPCC used as a source of mountain climbing magazines, and mountain climbers might comment on whether there's more or less snow now than there was in the past, and that would suddenly make it into the IPCC report as if it had the weight of science, when it was really the views of a few hikers who were remembering things from the past.